Hi, Miss Lancaster here. So just a quick video to kind of give you some key ideas of what you should be looking at while you're reading through chapter 2. This is poverty and class inequality. So this is really the first social problem, in-depth social problem that we'll be looking at. And I think as the semester goes along, you'll notice that it is intertwined with so many of the others because you can't really separate one social problem from another because they are deeply connected. So first off, you have to really kind of think about what the definition of poverty is, and that is ultimately just a deficiencies in the necessary material, good, or desirable economic, social, political, or cultural qualities. Okay, so you're deficient in something, right? So when we think about poverty, there's two ways to measure it. There's absolute poverty and there's relative poverty. So as you're reading through your textbook, make sure that you kind of recognize those differences. The absolute poverty, there's an objective measure. Okay, the relative poverty is much more of a subjective kind of aspect in which you're comparing yourselves to others. So the objective poverty, there's that poverty line, right? That as you're looking through the textbook, as you're reading through the textbook, excuse me, you'll see how that is measured and how that is created with the assumption that one third of your, it was created in 1963 and it was based on the idea of one third of a subsistence level of food basket for a family and then multiplied by 3 and then that's what our poverty line is based on. There's kind of quite a few problems with that when we really think about it. Hopefully as you start getting through the chapter and then you take a look at the assignment that I've given you, you'll see that measuring our poverty rate based on food and housing and things like that may be potentially problematic because very few people pay only one third of their housing and one third of their income for housing. Okay, poverty rates. There's some great figures in your textbook. Excuse me, that really can give you some kind of good information as far as you can see the ebbs and flow of poverty. I mean, you can see that at one point in time, um, poverty was pretty well under control in the US, began really declining until the 1980s. And then there's been a increase, then a recent drop, but for the most part, about 12.4% of our this is as of 2022 of our society live in poverty. Extreme poverty and low income, that's a community where 40% or more people live in poverty. In this textbook, in this chapter, you're going to see some information about social safety nets, and these are assistance programs. Um, they can be both means tested and not means tested. So when we talk about means tested, you have to qualify based on income. So that's where the poverty line comes in. And a lot of these programs, this includes like a Pell Grant, right, can go up to 185% of the poverty line. So when we think about that, that's health insurance, that's TANF, which is temporary assistance for needy families, SNAP, which is supplemental nutritional assistance plan, WIC, women, infants, and children, school lunches. These are all things that are means tested. Notice when I referred to TANF, that's temporary assistance for needy families. A lot of people think about that as welfare. Notice that the T stands for temporary. A lot of people think that many people, people were on it for a lifetime, but policies are kind of in place where that can't happen. So as you're reading through and you're learning about this material, kind of think about these false assumptions that we may have previously had in our mind. Food stamps, one thing is the national average for benefits is about $182 per person a month. So that's $6 a day. So the individuals who are getting assistance, they're not really getting as much as people think that they may be getting. And a lot of people who actually qualify for assistance don't even get it. Continuing through the chapter, you'll be looking at mobility. That is the actual movement within the social ladder. The higher you are in stratification, the less amount of movement. The lower you are, the less amount of movement. Most social mobility happens within the middle, the lower class. Individuals don't move because they lack resources. The upper class move because they have resources. So just kind of really thinking about this, in our open class system, mobility is very available. If you took an intro class, which I think a majority of you did, I think there's a few who have not taken intro. But if you have, then you're already familiar with social mobility and how it's measured. So that should hopefully be a review for those of you who've taken intro. But those who haven't, you can really kind of pay attention and recognize that we do have an open class system that does allow for movement. Inequality, though, is a result of our system, right? So there's the differences when we talk about the inequalities. It's really the differences between groups and individuals. Some have more resources than others. And there's really a difference between wealth and income. So the more wealth you have doesn't necessarily mean that you have high income. And high income doesn't necessarily mean that you have high wealth. They can be intertwined and interconnected. But if you grew up with wealth, you may not need as much income. And if you grow up without wealth, your income could be still paying your loans and things like that when you think about school. Okay, so income is what comes in, wealth is what you already have, the assets that you already have. So kind of recognizing that difference and how that relates to our social class is pretty important. While you're going through theory, take notice again that functionalism, key idea, everything has a purpose to create stability and harmony. So it really does talk about how social class and social inequality is functional for society. Different people need to do different jobs, and we need to basically pay individuals differently based on their qualifications. We need to motivate individuals to take on those most difficult positions, and therefore that's why they're paid more, according to the functionalist perspective. Okay. Then on the other hand, though, you have conflict perspective that really talks about the inequality kind of builds and creates and impacts who can do those higher paid jobs. Because if I start at a lower level, I'm going to struggle more, right? Because that's where that theory really talks about the competition that exists in society. One thing I like to really focus here, though, is where functionalism talks about motivation, conflict talks about competition. Competition and motivation kind of go hand in hand. You're not typically going to compete too much if you're not motivated to get something, right, in return. So recognizing both of those theories are really at that at that structural macro level, the social force level, that are really talking about and discussing how these social classes make our society run, right? From conflict perspective, it creates the stability and harmony, different people doing different things. And from a conflict perspective, it really does create this inequality and this oppression on some, while not on others. Functionalism, conflict theory, right? Then we think about symbolic interactionism. We recognize that there are lots of different symbols and meanings attached to our different social classes. So recognizing the status symbols that exist, and really even the definition of poverty, because when we think about if it's a deficiencies in the necessary materials or desirable economic social qualities, right? Social and cultural qualities, who's defined that, right? So those definitions of what is desirable and what is not desirable really kind of create some meanings for us. You'll notice while you're reading through the chapter, the culture of poverty thesis really talks about even the idea of living in poverty leads to the realization or the thought of perpetuating poverty because of the experiences and the interactions that they had. So kind of read through that. Let me know if you have questions. The specialized theories, social empathy, social inclusion, and distributive justice, I feel like they're pretty straightforward, but I'm here for you if you have questions. Please feel free to email me. Your assignment has been posted, and I hope that you have a great day.